Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education, by Charlotte Mason, Part 2, Chapter 1, A Growing Time. Meals out of doors. People who live in the country know the value of fresh air very well, and their children live out of doors, with intervals within for sleeping and eating. As to the latter, even country people do not make full use of their opportunities. On fine days, when it is warm enough to sit out without wraps, why should not tea and breakfast, everything but a hot dinner, be served out of doors? For we are an overwrought generation, running to nerves as a cabbage runs to seed, and every hour spent in the open is a clear gain, tending to the increase of brain power and bodily vigor, and to the lengthening of life itself. They who know what it is to have fevered skin and throbbing brain deliciously soothed by the cool touch of the air are inclined to make a new rule of life. Never be within doors when you can rightly be without. Besides the gain of an hour or two in the open air, there is this to be considered. Meals taken al fresco are usually joyous, and there is nothing like gladness for converting meat and drink into healthy blood and tissue. All the time, too, the children are storing up memories of a happy childhood. 50 years hence they will see the shadows of the boughs making patterns on the white tablecloth, and sunshine, children's laughter, hum of bees, and scent of flowers are being bottled up for after refreshment. For dwellers in towns and suburbs. But it is only the people who live, so to speak, in their own gardens who can make a practice of giving their children tea out of doors. For the rest of us, and the most of us, who live in towns or the suburbs of towns, that is included in the larger question. How much time daily in the open air should the children have, and how is it possible to secure this for them? In this time of extraordinary pressure, educational and social, perhaps a mother's first duty to her children is to secure for them a quiet growing time, a full 6 years of passive, receptive life, the waking part of it spent for the most part out in the fresh air. And this not for the gain in bodily health alone. Body and soul, heart and mind are nourished with food convenient for them when the children are let alone, let to live without friction and without stimulus amongst happy influences which incline them to be good. Possibilities of a day in the open. I make a point, says a judicious mother, of sending my children out, weather permitting, for an hour in the winter, and 2 hours a day in the summer months. That is well, but it is not enough. In the first place, do not send them. If it is any way possible, take them. For although the children should be left much to themselves, there is a great deal to be done, and a great deal to be prevented during these long hours in the open air. And long hours they should be. Not 2, but 4, 5, or 6 hours they should have on every tolerably fine day from April till October. Impossible, says an overwrought mother, who sees her way to no more for her children than a daily hour or so on the pavements of the neighbouring London squares. Let me repeat that I venture to suggest not what is practicable in any household, but what seems to me absolutely best for the children, and that in the faith that mothers work wonders once they are convinced that wonders are demanded of them. A journey of 20 minutes by rail or omnibus and a luncheon basket will make a day in the country possible to most town dwellers, and if one day, why not many, even every suitable day? Supposing we have got them, what is to be done with these golden hours, so that every one shall be delightful? They must be spent with some method, or the mother will be taxed, and the children bored. There is a great deal to be accomplished in this large fraction of the children's day. They must be kept in a joyous temper all the time, or they will miss some of the strengthening and refreshing held in charge for them by the blessed air. They must be let alone, left to themselves a great deal, to take in what they can of the beauty of earth and heavens, for of the evils of modern education few are worse than this, that the perpetual cackle of his elders leaves the poor child not a moment of time, nor an inch of space, wherein to wonder and grow. At the same time, here is the mother's opportunity to train the seeing eye, the hearing ear, and to drop seeds of truth into the open soul of the child, which shall germinate, blossom, and bear fruit, without further help or knowledge of hers. Then there is much to be got by perching in a tree or nestling in heather, but muscular development comes of more active ways, and an hour or two should be spent in vigorous play. And last, and truly least, a lesson or two must be got in. No storybooks. Let us suppose mother and children arrived at some breezy open, wherein it seemeth always afternoon. In the first place, it is not her business to entertain the little people. There should be no storybooks, no telling of tales, as little talk as possible, and that to some purpose. Who thinks to amuse children with tale or talk at a circus or a pantomime? And here is there not infinitely more displayed for their delectation? Our wise mother, arrived, first sends the children to let off their spirits in a wild scamper, with cry, halloo, and hullabaloo, and any extravagance that comes into their young heads. There is no distinction between big and little. The latter love to follow in the wake of their elders, and, in lessons or play, to pick up and do according to their little might. As for the baby, he is in bliss, divested of his garments, for he kicks and crawls and clutches the grass, laughs soft baby laughter, and takes in his little knowledge of shapes and properties in his own wonderful fashion, clothed in a woolen gown, long and loose, which is none the worse for the worst usage it may get. End of Part 2, Chapter 1, read by Kara Schallenberg, www.kray.org. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education, by Charlotte Mason, Part 2, Chapter 2, Sightseeing. By and by the others come back to their mother, and, while wits are fresh and eyes keen, she sends them off on an exploring expedition. Who can see the most, and tell the most, about yonder hillock, or brook, hedge, or copse? This is an exercise that delights children, and may be endlessly varied, carried on in the spirit of a game, and yet with the exactness and carefulness of a lesson. How to see. Find out all you can about that cottage at the foot of the hill, but do not pry about too much. Soon they are back, and there is a crowd of excited faces, and a hubbub of tongues, and random observations are shot breathlessly into the mother's ear. There are beehives. We saw a lot of bees going into one. There is a long garden. Yes, and there are sunflowers in it. And hen and chicken daisies and pansies. And there's a great deal of a pretty blue flower with rough leaves, Mother. What do you suppose it is? Borage for the bees, most likely. They are very fond of it. Oh, and there are apple and pear and plum trees on one side. There's a little path up the middle, you know. On which hand side are the fruit trees? The right, no, the left. Let me see, which is my thimble hand? Yes, it is the right-hand side. And there are potatoes and cabbages and mint and things on the other side. Where are the flowers, then? Oh, they are just the borders running down each side of the path. But we have not told Mother about the wonderful apple tree. I should think there are 1,000,000 apples on it, all ripe and rosy. 1,000,000, Fanny? Well, a great many, Mother. I don't know how many. And so on indefinitely, the mother getting by degrees a complete description of the cottage and its garden. Educational uses of sightseeing. This is all play to the children, but the mother is doing invaluable work. She is training their powers of observation and expression, increasing their vocabulary and their range of ideas by giving them the name and the uses of an object at the right moment, when they ask, "What is it?" and "What is it for?" And she is training her children in truthful habits by making them careful to see the fact and to state it exactly, without omission or exaggeration. The child who describes a tall tree going up into a point with rather roundish leaves, not a pleasant tree for shade because the branches all go up, deserves to learn the name of the tree and anything her mother has to tell her about it. But the little bungler who fails to make it clear whether he is describing an elm or a beech should get no encouragement. Not a foot should his mother move to see his tree. No coaxing should draw her in to talk about it, until, in despair, he goes off, and comes back with some more certain note, rough or smooth bark, rough or smooth leaves. Then the mother considers, pronounces, and, full of glee, he carries her off to see for herself. Discriminating observation. By degrees the children will learn discriminatingly every feature of the landscapes with which they are familiar, and think what a delightful possession for old age and middle life is a series of pictures imaged, feature by feature, in the sunny glow of a child's mind. The miserable thing about the childish recollections of most persons is that they are blurred, distorted, incomplete, no more pleasant to look upon than a fractured cup or a torn garment, and the reason is, not that the old scenes are forgotten, but that they were never fully seen. At the time there was no more than a hazy impression that such and such objects were present, and naturally, after a lapse of years, those features can rarely be recalled of which the child was not cognizant when he saw them before him. End of Part 2, Chapter 2. Read by Kara Schallenberg.
Home Education Series Volume 1. Home Education by Charlotte Mason. Part 2, Chapter 3. Picture Painting. Read by Amy Bodkin, Navarre, Florida. Method of. So exceedingly delightful is this faculty of taking mental photographs, exact images of the beauties of nature, we go about the world for the refreshment of seeing, that it is worth while to exercise children in another way towards this end, bearing in mind, however, that they see the near and the minute, but can only be made with an effort to look at the wide and the distant. Get the children to look well at some patch of landscape, and then to shut their eyes and call up the picture before them. If any bit of it is blurred, they had better look again. When they have a perfect image before their eyes, let them say what they see. Thus, I see a pond. It is shallow on this side, but deep on the other. Trees come to the water's edge on that side, and you can see their green leaves and branches so plainly in the water that you would think there was a wood underneath. Almost touching the trees and the water is a bit of blue sky with a soft white cloud, and when you look up you see that same little cloud, but with a great deal of sky instead of a patch, because there are no trees up there. There are lovely yellow water lilies round the far edge of the pond, and 2 or 3 of the big round leaves are turned up like sails. Near where I am standing 3 cows have come to drink, and one has got far into the water nearly up to her neck, etc. Strain on the attention. This, too, is an exercise children delight in, but as it involves some strain on the attention, it is fatiguing and should only be employed now and then. It is, however, well worth while to give children the habit of getting a bit of landscape by heart in this way, because it is the effort of recalling and reproducing that is fatiguing, while the altogether pleasurable act of seeing, fully and in detail, is likely to be repeated unconsciously until it becomes a habit by the child, who is required now and then to reproduce what he sees. Seeing fully and in detail. At first the children will want a little help in the art of seeing. The mother will say, "Look at the reflection of the trees. There might be a wood under the water. What do those standing up leaves remind you of?" and so on, until the children have noticed the salient points of the scene. She will even herself learn off 2 or 3 scenes and describe them with closed eyes for the children's amusement, and such little mimics are they, and at the same time so sympathetic that any graceful, fanciful touch which she throws into her descriptions will be reproduced with variations in theirs. The children will delight in this game of picture painting all the more if the mother introduce it by describing some great picture gallery she has seen, pictures of mountains, of moors, of stormy seas, of plowed fields, of little children at play, of an old woman knitting, and goes on to say that though she does not paint her pictures on canvas, and have them put in frames, she carries about with her just such a picture gallery, for whenever she sees anything lovely or interesting, she looks at it until she has the picture in her mind's eye, and then she carries it away with her own forever, a picture on view just when she wants it. a means of after-solace and refreshment. It would be difficult to overrate this habit of seeing and storing as a means of after-solace and refreshment. The busiest of us have holidays when we slip our necks out of the yoke and come face to face with nature, to be healed and blessed by the breathing balm, the silence and the calm of mute insensate things. This immediate refreshment is open to everybody according to his measure, but it is a mistake to suppose that everybody is able to carry away a refreshing image of that which gives him delight. Only a few can say with Wordsworth of scenes they have visited, "Though absent long, these forms of beauty have not been to me, as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. But oft in lonely rooms, and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them, in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration." And yet, this is no high poetic gift which the rest of us must be content to admire, but a common reward for taking pains in the act of seeing, which parents may do a great deal to confer upon their children. The mother must beware how she spoils the simplicity, the objective character of the child's enjoyment by treating his little descriptions as feats of cleverness to be repeated to his father or to visitors. She had better make a vow to suppress herself, to say nothing to nobody, in his presence at any rate, though the child should show himself a born poet. End of Part 2, Chapter 3. Read by Amy Bodkin.
Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education, by Charlotte Mason. Part 2, Chapter 4, Flowers and Trees. Children should know field crops. In the course of this sightseeing and picture painting, opportunities will occur to make the children familiar with rural objects and employments. If there are farmlands within reach, they should know meadow and pasture, clover, turnip, and cornfield, under every aspect, from the ploughing of the land to the getting in of the crops. Field flowers and the life history of plants. Milkwort, eyebright, rest harrow, lady's bedstraw, willow herb, every wild flower that grows in their neighborhood they should know quite well, should be able to describe the leaf, its shape, size, growing from the root or from the stem, the manner of flowering, a head of flowers, a single flower, a spike, etc. And having made the acquaintance of a wild flower so that they can never forget it or mistake it, they should examine the spot where they find it, so that they will know for the future in what sort of ground to look for such and such a flower. We should find wild thyme here. Oh, this is the very spot for marsh marigolds. We must come here in the spring. If the mother is no great botanist, she will find Miss Anne Pratt's Wild Flowers very useful, with its colored plates, like enough to identify the flowers by, common English names, and pleasant facts and fancies that the children delight in. To make collections of wild flowers for the several months, press them, and mount them neatly on squares of cartridge paper, with the English name, habitat, and date of finding of each, affords much happy occupation, and at the same time much useful training. Better still is it to accustom children to make careful brush drawings of the flowers that interest them, of the whole plant where possible. The study of trees. Children should be made early intimate with the trees, too, should pick out half a dozen trees, oak, elm, ash, beech, in their winter nakedness, and take these to be their year-long friends. In the winter they will observe the light tresses of the birch, the knotted arms of the oak, the sturdy growth of the sycamore. They may wait to learn the names of the trees until the leaves come. By and by, as the spring advances, behold a general stiffening and look of life in the still bare branches. Life stirs in the beautiful mystery of the leaf buds, a nest of delicate baby leaves lying in downy warmth within many waterproof wrappings. Oak and elm, beech and birch, each has its own way of folding and packing its leaflets. Observe the ruby-budded lime, and the ash with its pretty stag's foot of a bud, not green, but black. More black than ash buds in the front of March. The seasons should be followed, but it is hard to keep pace with the wonders that unfold themselves in the bountiful season bland. There are the dangling catkins and the little ruby-red pistillate flowers of the hazel, clusters of flowers, both of them, 2 sorts on a single tree, and the downy staminate catkins of the willow, and the festive breaking out of all the trees into lovely leafage, the learning the patterns of the leaves as they come out, and the naming of the trees from this and other signs. Then the flowers come, each shut up tight in the dainty casket we call a bud, as cunningly wrapped as the leaves in their buds, but less carefully guarded, for these sweet nurslings delay their coming for the most part until earth has a warm bed to offer, and the sun a kindly welcome. Leigh Hunt on Flowers. Suppose, says Leigh Hunt, suppose flowers themselves were new, suppose they had just come into the world, a sweet reward for some new goodness. Imagine what we should feel when we saw the first lateral stem bearing off from the main one, and putting forth a leaf. How we should watch the leaf gradually unfolding its little graceful hand, then another, then the main stalk rising and producing more, then one of them giving indications of the astonishing novelty, a bud, then this mysterious bud gradually unfolding like the leaf, amazing us, enchanting us, almost alarming us with delight, as if we knew not what enchantment were to ensue, till at length, in all its fairy beauty, and odorous voluptuousness, and mysterious elaboration of tender and living sculpture, shines forth the blushing flower. The flowers, it is true, are not new, but the children are, and it is the fault of their elders if every new flower they come upon is not to them a picciola, a mystery of beauty to be watched from day to day with unspeakable awe and delight. Meanwhile, we have lost sight of those half-dozen forest trees which the children have taken into a sort of comradeship for the year. Presently they have the delight of discovering that the great trees have flowers too, flowers very often of the same hue as their leaves, and that some trees put off having their leaves until their flowers have come and gone. By and by there is the fruit, and the discovery that every tree, with exceptions that they need not learn yet, and every plant bears fruit and seed after his kind. All this is stale knowledge to older people, but one of the secrets of the educator is to present nothing as stale knowledge, but to put himself in the position of the child, and wonder and admire with him, for every common miracle which the child sees with his own eyes makes him for the moment another Newton. Calendars. It is a capital plan for children to keep a calendar. The first oak leaf, the first tadpole, the first cowslip, the first catkin, the first ripe blackberries, where seen and when. The next year they will know when and where to look out for their favorites, and will, every year, be in a condition to add new observations. Think of the zest and interest, the object which such a practice will give to daily walks and little excursions. There is hardly a day when some friend may not be expected to hold a first at home. Nature Diaries. As soon as he is able to keep it himself, a nature diary is a source of delight to a child. Every day's walk gives him something to enter. 3 squirrels in a larch tree, a jay flying across such a field, a caterpillar climbing up a nettle, a snail eating a cabbage leaf, a spider dropping suddenly to the ground, where he found ground ivy, how it was growing, and what plants were growing with it, how bindweed or ivy manages to climb. Innumerable matters to record occur to the intelligent child. While he is quite young, 5 or 6, he should begin to illustrate his notes freely with brush drawings. He should have a little help at first in mixing colors, in the way of principles, not directions. He should not be told to use now this and now that, but we get purple by mixing so-and-so, and then he should be left to himself to get the right tint. As for drawing, instruction has no doubt its time and place, but his nature diary should be left to his own initiative. A child of 6 will produce a dandelion, poppy, daisy, iris with its leaves, impelled by the desire to represent what he sees with surprising vigor and correctness. An exercise book with stiff covers serves for a nature diary, but care is necessary in choosing paper that answers both for writing and brush drawing. I can't stop thinking. But I can't stop thinking. I can't make my mind sit down. Poor little girl. All children owe you thanks for giving voice to their dumb woes. And we grown-up people have so little imagination that we send a little boy with an overactive brain to play by himself in the garden in order to escape the fag of lessons. Little we know how the brain people swarm in and out and rush about. The human brain is like a millstone, turning ever round and round. If it have nothing else to grind, it must itself be ground. Set the child to definite work by all means, and give him something to grind. But pray, let him work with things, and not with signs, the things of nature in their own places, meadow and hedgerow, woods and shore. End of Part 2, Chapter 4, read by Kara Schallenberg. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education, by Charlotte Mason. Part 2, Chapter 5, Living Creatures. A field of interest and delight. Then, as for the living creatures, here is a field of unbounded interest and delight. The domesticated animals are soon taken into kindly fellowship by the little people. Perhaps they live too far from the real country for squirrels and wild rabbits to be more to them than a dream of possible delights. But surely there is a pond within reach, by road or rail, where tadpoles may be caught and carried home in a bottle, fed and watched through all their changes, fins disappearing, tails getting shorter and shorter, until at last there is no tail at all, and a pretty pert little frog looks you in the face. Turn up any chance stone, and you may come upon a colony of ants. We have always known that it becomes us to consider their ways and be wise, but now think of all Lord Avebury has told us to make that 12-year-old ant of his acquaintance quite a personage. Then there are the bees. Some of us may have heard the late Dean Farrar describe that lesson he was present at on How Doth the Little Busy Bee? The teacher bright, but the children not responsive. They took no interest at all in the little busy bees. He suspected the reason, and, questioning the class, found that not one of them had ever seen a bee. Had never seen a bee! Think for a moment, said he, of how much that implies. And then we were moved by an eloquent picture of the sad child life from which bees and birds and flowers are all shut out. But how many children are there who do not live in the slums of London, and yet are unable to distinguish a bee from a wasp, or even a humble from a honey bee? Children should be encouraged to watch. Children should be encouraged to watch, patiently and quietly, until they learn something of the habits and history of bee, ant, wasp, spider, hairy caterpillar, dragonfly, and whatever of larger growth comes in their way. The creatures never have any habits while I am looking, a little girl in some story-book is made to complain, but that was her fault. The bright, keen eyes with which children are blessed were made to see, and see into, the doings of creatures too small for the unaided observation of older people. Ants may be brought under home observation in the following way. Get 2 pieces of glass 1 foot square, 3 strips of glass 11½ inches long, and 1 strip 11 inches long, all these 1/4 inch wide. The glass must be carefully cut so as to fit exactly. Place the 4 strips of glass upon one of the sheets of glass and fix in an exact square, leaving a 1/2 inch opening with seccotine or any good fixer. Get from an ant hill about 12 ants. The yellow ants are best, as the red are inclined to be quarrelsome. A few eggs and 1 queen. The queen will be quite twice as large as an ordinary ant, and so can easily be seen. Take some of the earth of the ant hill. Put the earth with your ants and eggs upon the sheet of glass, and fix the other sheet above, leaving only the small hole in one corner, made by the shorter strip, which should be stopped with a bit of cotton wool. The ants will be restless for perhaps 48 hours, but will then begin to settle and arrange the earth. Remove the wool plug once a week, and replace it after putting 2 or 3 drops of honey on it. Once in 3 weeks remove the plug to drop in with a syringe about 10 drops of water. This will not be necessary in the winter while the ants are asleep. This nest will last for years. With regard to the horror which some children show of beetle, spider, worm, that is usually a trick picked up from grown-up people. Kingsley's children would run after their daddy with a delicious worm, a lovely toad, a sweet beetle, carried tenderly in both hands. There are real antipathies not to be overcome, such as Kingsley's own horror of a spider, but children who are accustomed to hold and admire caterpillars and beetles from their babyhood will not give way to affected horrors. The child who spends an hour in watching the ways of some new grub he has come upon will be a man of mark yet. Let all he finds out about it be entered in his diary, by his mother, if writing be a labour to him, where he finds it, what it is doing, or seems to him to be doing, its colour, shape, legs. Some day he will come across the name of the creature, and will recognize the description of an old friend. The force of public opinion in the home. Some children are born naturalists, with a bent inherited, perhaps, from an unknown ancestor. But every child has a natural interest in the living things about him, which it is the business of his parents to encourage. For but few children are equal to holding their own in the face of public opinion, and if they see that the things which interest them are indifferent or disgusting to you, their pleasure in them vanishes, and that chapter in the book of nature is closed to them. It is likely that the natural history of Selborne would never have been written had it not been that the naturalist's father used to take his boys on daily foraging expeditions, when not a moving or growing thing, not a pebble nor a boulder within miles of Selborne, escaped their eager examination. Audubon, the American ornithologist, is another instance of the effect of this kind of early training. "When I had hardly learned to walk," he says, "and to articulate those first words always so endearing to parents, the productions of nature that lay spread all around were constantly pointed out to me. My father generally accompanied my steps, procured birds and flowers for me, and pointed out the elegant movements of the former, the beauty and softness of their plumage, the manifestations of their pleasure, or their sense of danger, and the always perfect forms and splendid attire of the latter. He would speak of the departure and return of the birds with the season, describe their haunts, and, more wonderful than all, their change of livery, thus exciting me to study them, and to raise my mind towards their great Creator." What town children can do. Town children may get a great deal of pleasure in watching the ways of sparrows, knowing little birds, and easily tamed by a dole of crumbs, and their days out will bring them in the way of new acquaintances. But much may be done with sparrows. A friend writes, "Have you seen the man in the gardens of the Tuileries feeding and talking to dozens of them? They sit on his hat, his hands, and feed from his fingers. When he raises his arms, they all flutter up and then settle again on him and round him. I have watched him call a sparrow from a distance by name, and refuse food to all others until Pt2, a pretty pied sparrow, came for his destined bit. Others had their names and came at call, but I could not see any distinguishing feature, and the crowd of sparrows on the walk, benches, and railing formed a most attentive audience to the bright French talk which kept them in constant motion as they were, here one and there another, invited to come for a tempting morsel. Truly a St. Francis and the birds." The child who does not know the portly form and spotted breast of the thrush, the graceful flight of the swallow, the yellow bill of the blackbird, the gush of song which the skylark pours from above, is nearly as much to be pitied as those London children who had never seen a bee. A pleasant acquaintance, easy to pick up, is the hairy caterpillar. The moment to seize him is when he is seen shuffling along the ground in a great hurry. He is on the lookout for quiet quarters in which to lie up. Put him in a box, then, and cover the box with net, through which you may watch his operations. Food does not matter, he has other things to attend to. By and by he spins a sort of white tent or hammock into which he retires. You may see through it, and watch him, perhaps at the very moment when his skin splits asunder, leaving him, for months to come, an egg-shaped mass without any sign of life. At last the living thing within breaks out of this bundle, and there it is, the handsome tiger moth, fluttering feeble wings against the net. Most children of 6 have had this taste of a naturalist's experience, and it is worth speaking of only because, instead of being merely a harmless amusement, it is a valuable piece of education, of more use to the child than the reading of a whole book of natural history, or much geography and Latin. For the evil is that children get their knowledge of natural history, like all their knowledge, at second hand. They are so sated with wonders that nothing surprises them, and they are so little used to see for themselves that nothing interests them. The cure for this blasé condition is to let them alone for a bit, and then begin on new lines. Poor children, it is no fault of theirs if they are not as they were meant to be, curious, eager little souls, all agog to explore so much of this wonderful world as they can get at, as quite their first business in life. He prayeth best who loveth best all things both great and small. For the dear God who loveth us, he made and loveth all. Nature knowledge the most important for young children. It would be well if all we persons in authority, parents, and all who act for parents, could make up our minds that there is no sort of knowledge to be got in these early years so valuable to children as that which they get for themselves of the world they live in. Let them once get touch with nature, and a habit is formed, which will be a source of delight through life. We were all meant to be naturalists, each in his degree, and it is inexcusable to live in a world so full of the marvels of plant and animal life, and to care for none of these things. Mental training of a child naturalist. Consider, too, what an unequaled mental training the child naturalist is getting for any study or calling under the sun. The powers of attention, of discrimination, of patient pursuit, growing with his growth, what will they not fit him for? Besides, life is so interesting to him that he has no time for the faults of temper which generally have their source in ennui. There is no reason why he should be peevish or sulky or obstinate when he is always kept well amused. Nature work especially valuable for girls. I say he from force of habit, as speaking of the representative sex, but truly that she should be thus conversant with nature is a matter of infinitely more importance to the little girl. She it is who is most tempted to indulge in ugly tempers, as child and woman, because time hangs heavy on her hands. She, whose idler, more desultory habits of mind want the spur and the bridle of an earnest, absorbing pursuit, whose feebler health demands to be braced by an out-of-door life full of healthy excitement. Moreover, it is to the girls, little and big, a most true kindness to lift them out of themselves, and out of the round of petty personal interests and emulations, which too often hem in their lives, and then, with whom but the girls must it rest to mould the generations yet to be born? End of Part 2, Chapter 5. Read by Kara Schallenberg.
Home Education Series Volume 1. Home Education by Charlotte Mason. Part 2, Chapter 6. Field Lore and Naturalists' Books. Reverence for Life. Is it advisable, then, to teach the children the elements of natural science? Of biology, botany, zoology? On the whole, no. The dissection even of a flower is painful to a sensitive child. And during the first 6 or 8 years of life, I would not teach them any botany which should necessitate the pulling of flowers to bits. Much less should they be permitted to injure or destroy any non-noxious form of animal life. Reverence for life, as a wonderful and awful gift, which a ruthless child may destroy but never can restore, is a lesson of first importance to the child. Let knowledge grow from more to more, but more of reverence in us dwell. The child who sees his mother with reverent touch lift an early snowdrop to her lips learns a higher lesson than the print books can teach. Years hence, when the children are old enough to understand that science itself is in a sense sacred and demands some sacrifices, all the common information they have been gathering until then, and the habits of observation they have acquired, will form a capital groundwork for a scientific education. In the meantime, let them consider the lilies of the field and the fowls of the air. Rough classification at first hand. For convenience in describing, they should be able to name and distinguish petals, sepals, and so on. And they should be encouraged to make such rough classifications as they can with their slight knowledge of both animal and vegetable forms. Plants with heart-shaped or spoon-shaped leaves, with whole or divided leaves, leaves with crisscross veins, and leaves with straight veins, bell-shaped flowers and cross-shaped flowers, flowers with 3 petals, with 4, with 5, trees which keep their leaves all the year, and trees which lose them in the autumn, creatures with a backbone and creatures without, creatures that eat grass and creatures that eat flesh, and so on. To make collections of leaves and flowers pressed and mounted, and arranged according to their form, affords much pleasure, and what is better, valuable training in the noticing of differences and resemblances. Patterns for this sort of classification of leaves and flowers will be found in every little book of elementary botany. The power to classify, discriminate, distinguish between things that differ is amongst the highest faculties of the human intellect, and no opportunity to cultivate it should be let slip. But a classification got out of books that the child does not make for himself, and is not able to verify for himself, cultivates no power but that of verbal memory, and a phrase or two of Tamil or other unknown tongue, learnt off, would serve that purpose just as well. Uses of naturalists' books. The real use of naturalists' books at this stage is to give the child delightful glimpses into the world of wonders he lives in, to reveal the sort of things to be seen by curious eyes, and fill him with desire to make discoveries for himself. There are many to be had, all pleasant reading, many of them written by scientific men, and yet requiring little or no scientific knowledge for their enjoyment. Mothers and teachers should know about nature. The mother cannot devote herself too much to this kind of reading. Not only that she may read tidbits to her children about matters they have come across, but that she may be able to answer their queries and direct their observation. And not only the mother, but any woman who is likely ever to spend an hour or two in the society of children, should make herself mistress of this sort of information. The children will adore her for knowing what they want to know, and who knows but she may give it its bent for life to some young mind destined to do great things for the world. End of Part 2, Chapter 6. Read by Julina Goodell.
Home Education Series Volume 1, Home Education by Charlotte Mason. Part 2, Chapter 7. The Child Gets Knowledge by Means of His Senses. Read by Julia Ward. Nature's Teaching. Watch a child standing at gaze at some sight new to him, a plow at work, for instance, and you will see he is as naturally occupied as is a babe at the breast. He is, in fact, taking in the intellectual food which the working faculty of his brain at this period requires. In his early years, the child is all eyes. He observes, or more truly, he perceives, calling sight, touch, taste, smell, and hearing to his aid, that he may learn all that is discoverable by him about every new thing that comes under his notice. Everybody knows how a baby fumbles with soft little fingers and carries to his mouth and bangs that it may produce what sound there is in it, the spoon or doll, which supercilious grown-up people give him to keep him quiet. The child is at his lessons and is learning all about it at a rate utterly surprising to the physiologist, who considers how much is implied in the act of seeing, for instance. That to the infant, as to the blind adult restored to sight, there is at first no difference between a flat picture and a solid body. That the ideas of form and solidity are not obtained by sight at all, but are the judgments of experience. Then think of the vague passes in the air the little fist makes before it lays hold of the object of desire, and you see how he learns the whereabouts of things, having as yet no idea of direction. And why does he cry for the moon? Why does he crave equally a horse or a housefly as an appropriate plaything? Because far and near, large and small, are ideas he has yet to grasp. The child has truly a great deal to do before he is in a condition to believe his own eyes. But nature teaches so gently, so gradually, so persistently, that he is never overdone, but goes on gathering little stores of knowledge about whatever comes before him. And this is the process the child should continue for the first few years of his life. Now is the storing time, which should be spent in laying up images of things familiar. By and by, he will have to conceive of things he has never seen. How can he do it except by comparison with things he has seen and knows? By and by, he will be called upon to reflect, understand, reason. What material will he have unless he has a magazine of facts to go upon? The child who has been made to observe how high in the heavens the sun is at noon on a summer's day, how low at noon on a day in midwinter, is able to conceive of the great heat of the tropics under a vertical sun, and to understand that the climate of a place depends greatly upon the mean height the sun reaches above the horizon. Overpressure. A great deal has been said lately about the danger of overpressure, of requiring too much mental work from a child of tender years. The danger exists, but lies not in giving the child too much, but in giving him the wrong thing to do, the sort of work for which the present state of his mental development does not fit him. Who expects a boy in petticoats to lift half a hundredweight? But give the child work that nature intended for him, and the quantity he can get through with ease is practically unlimited. Who ever saw a child tired of seeing, of examining in his own way unfamiliar things? This is the sort of mental nourishment for which he has an unbounded appetite, because it is that food of the mind on which, for the present, he is meant to grow. Object lessons. Now, how far is this craving for natural sustenance met? In infant and kindergarten schools, by the object lesson, which is good so far as it goes, but is sometimes like that bean a day on which the Frenchman fed his horse. The child at home has more new things brought under his notice, if with less method. Neither at home nor at school is much effort made to set before the child the abundant feast of eyes which his needs demand. A child learns from things. We older people, partly because of our maturer intellect, partly because of our defective education, get most of our knowledge through the medium of words. We set the child to learn in the same way and find him dull and slow. Why? Because it is only with a few words in common use that he associates a definite meaning. All the rest are no more to him than the vocables of a foreign tongue. But set him face to face with a thing, and he is 20 times as quick as you are in knowing all about it. Knowledge of things flies to the mind of a child as steel filings to a magnet. And, pari passu with his knowledge of things, his vocabulary grows. For it is a law of the mind that what we know, we struggle to express. This fact accounts for many of the apparently aimless questions of children. They are in quest, not of knowledge, but of words to express the knowledge they have. Now consider what a culpable waste of intellectual energy it is to shut up a child blessed with this inordinate capacity for seeing and knowing within the four walls of a house or the dreary streets of a town. Or suppose that he is let run loose in the country, where there is plenty to see. It is nearly as bad to let this great faculty of the child's dissipate itself in random observations for want of method and direction. The sense of beauty comes from early contact with nature. There is no end to the store of common information, got in such a way that it will never be forgotten, with which an intelligent child may furnish himself before he begins his school career. The boy who can tell you offhand where to find each of the half-dozen most graceful birches, the 3 or 4 finest ash trees in the neighborhood of his home, has chances in life 12 to 1 compared with the lower, slower intelligence that does not know an elm from an oak. Not merely chances of success, but chances of a larger, happier life. For it is curious how certain feelings are linked with the mere observation of nature and natural objects. The aesthetic sense of the beautiful, says Dr. Carpenter, of the sublime, of the harmonious, seems in its most elementary form to connect itself immediately with the perceptions which arise out of the contact of our minds with external nature. While he quotes Dr. Morel, who says still more forcibly that all those who have shown a remarkable appreciation of form and beauty date their first impressions from a period lying far behind the existence of definite ideas or verbal instruction. Most grown men lose the habit of observation. Thus we owe something to Mr. Evans for taking his little daughter, Mary Ann, with him on long business drives among the pleasant Warwickshire lanes. The little girl stood up between her father's knees, seeing much and saying little, and the outcome was the scenes of rural life in Adam Bede and the Mill on the Floss. Wordsworth, reared amongst the mountains, becomes a very prophet of nature, while Tennyson draws endless imagery from the levels of the eastern counties where he was brought up. Little David Copperfield was a very observant child, though, says he, I think the memory of most of us can go farther back into such times than many of us suppose, just as I believe the power of observation in numbers of very young children to be quite wonderful for its closeness and accuracy. Indeed, I think that most grown men who are remarkable in this respect may with greater propriety be said not to have lost the faculty than to have acquired it. The rather, as I generally observe such men to retain a certain freshness and gentleness and capacity of being pleased, which are also an inheritance they have preserved from their childhood. In which remark Dickens makes his hero talk sound philosophy as well as kindly sense. End of Part 2, Chapter 7. Read by Julia Ward. Home Education Series Volume 1, Home Education by Charlotte Mason. Part 2, Chapter 8. The child should be made familiar with natural objects. Read by Julia Ward. The observant child should be put in the way of things worth observing. But what is the use of being a very observant child if you are not put in the way of things worth observing? And here is the difference between the streets of a town and the sights and sounds of the country. There is plenty to be seen in a town, and children, accustomed to the ways of the streets, become nimble-witted enough. But the scraps of information to be picked up in a town are isolated fragments. They do not hang on to anything else, nor come to anything more. The information may be convenient, but no one is the wiser for knowing on which side of the street is Smith's and which turning leads to Thompson's shop. Every natural object, a member of a series. Now take up a natural object, it does not matter what, and you are studying one of a group, a member of a series. Whatever knowledge you get about it is so much towards the science which includes all of its kind. Break off an elder twig in the spring, you notice a ring of wood around the center of pith, and there you have at a glance a distinguishing character of the great division of the vegetable world. You pick up a pebble, its edges are perfectly smooth and rounded. Why, you ask? It is water-worn, weather-worn, and that little pebble brings you face to face with disintegration, the force to which more than to any other we owe the aspects of the world which we call picturesque. Glen, ravine, valley, hill. It is not necessary that the child should be told anything about disintegration or dicotyledon, only that he should observe the wood and pith in the hazel twig, the pleasant roundness of the pebble. By and by he will learn the bearing of the facts with which he is already familiar. A very different thing from learning the reason why of facts, which have never come under his notice. Power will pass more and more into the hands of scientific men. It is infinitely well worth the mother's while to take some pains every day to secure, in the first place, that her children spend hours daily amongst rural and natural objects, and in the second place, to infuse into them, or rather, to cherish in them, the love of investigation. I say it deliberately, says Kingsley. As a student of society and of history, power will pass more and more into the hands of scientific men. They will rule, and they will act, cautiously, we may hope, and modestly, and charitably, because in learning true knowledge, they will have learnt also their own ignorance, and the vastness, the complexity, the mystery of nature. But they will be able to rule, they will be able to act, because they have taken the trouble to learn the facts and the laws of nature. Intimacy with nature makes for personal well-being. But to enable them to swim with the stream is the least of the benefits this early training should confer on the children. A love of nature, implanted so early that it will seem to them hereafter to have been born in them, will enrich their lives with pure interests, absorbing pursuits, health, and good humor. I have seen, says the same writer, the young man of fierce passions and uncontrollable daring expend healthily that energy which threatened daily to plunge him into recklessness, if not into sin, upon hunting out and collecting, through rock and bog, snow and tempest, every bird and egg of the neighboring forest. I have seen the young London beauty, amid all the excitement and temptation of luxury and flattery, with her heart pure and her mind occupied in a boudoir full of shells, fossils, flowers, and seaweeds, keeping herself unspotted from the world by considering the lilies of the field, how they grow. End of Part 2, Chapter 8.
Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education, by Charlotte Mason. Part 2, Chapter 9, Out-of-Door Geography. Read by Lisa A. Small things may teach great. After this long digression, intended to impress upon mothers the supreme importance of stirring up in their children a love of nature and of natural objects, a deep-seated spring to send up pure waters into the driest places of afterlife, we must return to the mother whom we have left out of doors all this time, waiting to know what she is to do next. This pleasant earth of ours is not to be overlooked in the out-of-door education of the children. How do you get time for so much? Oh, I leave out subjects of no educational value. I do not teach geography, for instance, said an advanced young theorist with all sorts of certificates. Pictorial geography. But the mother, who knows better, will find 100 opportunities to teach geography by the way. A duck pond is a lake or an inland sea. Any brooklet will serve to illustrate the great rivers of the world. A hillock grows into a mountain, an alpine system. A hazel copse suggests the mighty forests of the Amazon, a reedy swamp the rice fields of China, a meadow the boundless prairies of the West. The pretty purple flowers of the common mallow is a text whereon to hang the cotton fields of the southern states. Indeed, the whole field of pictorial geography, maps may wait until by and by, may be covered in this way. The position of the sun. And not only this, the children should be taught to observe the position of the sun in the heavens from hour to hour, and by his position to tell the time of day. Of course they will want to know why the sun is such an indefatigable traveler, and thereby hangs a wonderful tale, which they may as well learn in the age of faith, of the relative sizes of sun and earth, and of the nature and movements of the latter. Clouds, rain, snow, and hail. Clouds and rain, snow and hail, winds and vapors fulfilling his word, are all everyday mysteries that the mother will be called upon to explain faithfully, however simply. There are certain ideas which children must get from within a walking radius of their own home, if ever they are to have a real understanding of maps and of geographical terms. Distance is one of these, and the first idea of distance is to be attained by what children find a delightful operation. A child walks at his usual pace. Somebody measures and tells him the length of his pace, and he measures the paces of his brothers and sisters. Then such a walk, such a distance here and there, is solemnly paced, and a little sum follows. So many inches or feet covered by each pace equals so many yards in the whole distance. Various short distances about the child's home should be measured in this way. And when the idea of covering distance is fully established, the idea of time as a means of measurement should be introduced. The time taken to pace 100 yards should be noted down. Having found out that it takes 2 minutes to pace 100 yards, children will be able for the next step, that if they have walked for 30 minutes, the walk should measure 1,500 yards. In 35 minutes, they would have walked a mile, or rather 1,750 yards, and then they could add the 10 yards more, which would make a mile. The longer the legs, the longer the pace, and most grown people can walk a mile in 20 minutes. Direction. By the time they have got somewhat familiar with the idea of distance, that of direction should be introduced. The first step is to make children observant of the progress of the sun. The child who observes the sun for a year, and notes down for himself or dictates the times of his rising and setting for the greater part of the year, and the points of his rising and setting, will have secured a basis for a good deal of definite knowledge. Such observation should take in the reflection of the sun's light, the evening light reflected by east windows, the morning light by west windows, the varying length and intensity of shadows, the cause of shadows to be learned by the shadow cast by a figure between the blind and a candle. He should associate, too, the hot hours of the day with the sun high overhead, and the cool hours of the morning and evening with a low sun, and should be reminded that if he stands straight before the fire, he feels the heat more than if he were in a corner of the room. When he is prepared by a little observation of the course of the sun, he is ready to take in the idea of direction, which depends entirely upon the sun. East and West. Of course, the first two ideas are that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. From this fact he will be able to tell the direction in which the places near his own home or the streets of his own town lie. Bid him stand so that his right hand is towards the east where the sun rises, and his left towards the west where the sun sets. Then he is looking towards the north, and his back is towards the south. All the houses, streets, and towns on his right hand are to the east of him. Those on the left are to the west. The places he must walk straight forward to reach are north of him, and the places behind him are to the south. If he is in a place new to him, where he has never seen the sun rise or set, and wants to know in what direction a certain road runs, he must notice in what direction his own shadow falls at 12 o'clock, because at noon the shadows of all objects fall towards the north. Then if he face the north, he has, as before, the south behind him, the east on his right hand, the west on his left, or if he face the sun at noon, he faces south. Practice in finding direction. This will throw an interesting light for him on the names of our great railways. A child may become ready in noticing the directions of places by a little practice. Let him notice how each of the windows of his schoolroom faces, or the windows of each of the rooms in his home, the rows of houses he passes in his walks, and which are the north, south, east, and west sides of the churches he knows. He will soon be prepared to notice the direction of the wind by noticing the smoke from the chimneys, the movement of branches, corn, grass, etc. If the wind blow from the north wind doth blow, and we shall have snow. If it blow from the west, a west wind, we expect rain. Care must be taken at this point to make it clear to the child that the wind is named after the quarter it comes from, and not from the point it blows towards. just as he is English because he was born in England, and not French because he goes to France. The ideas of distance and direction may now be combined. Such a building is 200 yards to the east of the gate. Such a village is 2 miles to the west. He will soon come across the difficulty that a place is not exactly east or west, north or south. It is well to let him give, in a roundabout way, the direction of places as more to the east than to the west, very near the east but not quite, halfway between east and west. He will value the exact means of expression all the more for having felt the need of them. Later he should be introduced to the wonders of the mariner's compass, should have a little pocket compass of his own, and should observe the 4 cardinal and all the other points. These will afford him the names for directions that he has found it difficult to describe. Compass drill. Then he should do certain compass drill in this way. Bid him hold the N of the compass towards the north. Then, with the compass in your hand, turn towards the east, and you will see a remarkable thing. The little needle moves too, but moves quite by itself in just the other direction. Turn to the west, and again the needle moves in the opposite direction to that in which you move. However little you turn, a little quiver of the needle follows your movement. And you look at it, wondering how the little thing could perceive you had moved, when you hardly knew it yourself. Walk straight on in any direction, and the needle is fairly steady, only fairly steady, because you are sure, without intending it, to move a little to the right or left. Turn round very slowly, a little bit at a time, beginning at the north and turning towards the east, and you may make the needle also move round in a circle. It moves in the opposite direction to yourself, for it is trying to get back to the north from which you are turning. Boundaries. The children having got the idea of direction, it will be quite easy to introduce that of boundaries. Such and such a turnip field, for instance, is bounded by the high road on the south, by a wheat crop on the southeast, a hedge on the northeast, and so on, the children getting by degrees the idea that the boundaries of a given space are simply whatever touches it on every side. Thus one crop may touch another without any dividing line, and therefore one crop bounds the other. It is well that children should get clear notions on this subject, or later they will be vague, when they learn that such a county is bounded by so-and-so. In connection with bounded spaces, whether they be villages, towns, ponds, fields, or what not, children should be led to notice the various crops raised in the district, why pasture lands and why cornfields, what manner of rocks appear, and how many sorts of trees grow in the neighborhood. For every field or other space that is examined, they should draw a rude plan in the sand, giving the shape roughly, and lettering the directions as north, south, west, etc. Plans. By and by, when they have learned to draw plans indoors, they will occasionally pace the length of a field and draw their plan according to scale, allowing an inch for 5 or for 10 yards. The ground plans of garden, stables, house, etc. might follow. Local geography. It is probable that a child's own neighborhood will give him opportunities to learn the meaning of hill and dale, pool and brook, watershed, the current, bed, banks, tributaries of a brook, the relative positions of villages and towns. And all this local geography he must be able to figure roughly on a plan, done with chalk on a rock, or with walking stick in the gravel, perceiving the relative distances and situations of the places he marks. End of Part 2, Chapter 9.
Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education, by Charlotte Mason. Part 2, Chapter 10, The Child and Mother Nature. Read by John Dimitri, East Haven, Connecticut. The mother must refrain from too much talk. Does so wide a program alarm the mother? Does she, with dismay, see herself talking through the whole of those 5 or 6 hours, and, even at that, not getting through a tithe of the teaching laid out for her? On the contrary, the less she says, the better. And as for the quantity of educational work to be got through, It is the fable of the anxious pendulum over again. It is true there are countless ticks to be ticked, but there will always be a second of time to tick in, and no more than a single tick is to be delivered in any given second. Making a new acquaintance. The rapid little people will have played their play, whether of sightseeing or picture painting, in a quarter of an hour or so. For the study of natural objects, an occasional look, an attentive examination of the object on the mother's own part, a name given, a remark, a dozen words long, made at the right moment, and the children have begun a new acquaintance which they will prosecute for themselves. And not more than 1 or 2 such presentations should occur in a single day. Now see how much leisure there is left. The mother's real difficulty will be to keep herself from much talk with the children, and to hinder them from occupying themselves with her. There are few things sweeter and more precious to the child than playful prattle with her mother. But one thing is better, the communing with the larger mother, in order to which the child and she should be left to themselves. This is truly a delightful thing to watch. The mother reads her book or knits her sock, checking all attempts to make talk. The child stares up into a tree or down into a flower, doing nothing, thinking of nothing, or leads a bird's life among the branches, or capers about in aimless ecstasy. Quite foolish, irrational doings, but all the time a fashioning is going on. Nature is doing her part, with the vow, "This child I to myself will take. She shall be mine, and I will make a lady of my own." 2 things permissible to the mother. There is one thing the mother will allow herself to do as interpreter between nature and the child, but that not oftener than once a week or once a month, and with look and gesture of delight, rather than with flow of improving words. She will point out to the child some touch of especial loveliness in coloring or grouping in the landscape or in the heavens. One other thing she will do, but very rarely, and with tender filial reverence. Most likely she will say her prayers, and speak out of her prayer. For to touch on this ground with hard words is to wound the soul of the child. She will point to some lovely flower or gracious tree, not only as a beautiful work, but a beautiful thought of God, in which we may believe He finds continual pleasure, and which He is pleased to see His human children rejoice in. Such a seed of sympathy with the divine thought sown in the heart of the child is worth many of the sermons the man may listen to hereafter, much of the divinity he may read. End of Part 2, Chapter 10. Read by John Dimitri, East Haven, Connecticut. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education, by Charlotte Mason, Part 2, Chapter 11, Out-of-Door Games, etc. Read by John Dimitri, East Haven, Connecticut. The bright hours fly by, and there is still at least one lesson on the program, to say nothing of an hour or 2 for games in the afternoon. The thought of a lesson is uninviting after the discussion of much that is more interesting, and truly more important. But it need only be a little lesson, 10 minutes long, and the slight break and the effort of attention will give the greater zest to the pleasure and leisure to follow. The French lesson. The daily French lesson is that which should not be omitted. That children should learn French orally by listening to and repeating French words and phrases. That they should begin so young that the difference of accent does not strike them. But they repeat the new French word all the same as if it were English, and use it as freely. That they should learn a few, 2 or 3, 5 or 6, new French words daily, and that, at the same time, the old words should be kept in use, are points to be considered more fully hereafter. In the meantime, It is so important to keep tongue and ear familiar with French vocables that not a lesson should be omitted. The French lesson may, however, be made to fit in with the spirit of the other out-of-door occupations. The half-dozen words may be the parts, leaves, branches, bark, trunk of a tree, or the colors of the flowers, or the movements of bird, cloud, lamb, child. In fact, the new French words should be but another form of expression for the ideas that for the time fill the child's mind. Noisy games. The afternoon's games, after luncheon, are an important part of the day's doings for the elder children, though the younger have probably worn themselves out by this time with the ceaseless restlessness by means of which nature provides for the due development of muscular tissue in them. Let them sleep in the sweet air and awake refreshed. Meanwhile, the elders play. The more they run and shout and toss their arms, the more healthful is the play. And this is one reason why mothers should carry their children off to lonely places, where they may use their lungs to their heart's content without risk of annoying anybody. The muscular structure of the organs of voice is not enough considered. Children love to indulge in cries and shouts, and view halloos, and this rude and noisy play, with which their elders have not much patience, is no more than nature's way of providing for the due exercise of organs, upon whose working power the health and happiness of the child's future largely depend. People talk of weak lungs, weak chest, weak throat, but perhaps it does not occur to everybody that strong lungs and strong throat are commonly to be had on the same terms as strong arm or wrist, by exercise, training, use, work. Still, if the children can give voice musically and move rhythmically to the sound of their own voices, so much the better. In this respect, French children are better off than English. They dance and sing through 100 roundelays. Just such games, no doubt, mimic marryings and buryings as the children played at long ago in the marketplace of Jerusalem. Ronds. Before Puritan innovations made us a staid and circumspect people, English lads and lasses of all ages danced out little dramas on the village green, accompanying themselves with the words and airs of just such ronds as the French children sing today. We have a few of them left still, to be heard at Sunday school treats and other gatherings of the children, and they are well worth preserving. There came 3 dukes a-riding, a-riding, a-riding. Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. Here we come gathering nuts in May. What has my poor prisoner done? And many more, all set to delightful sing-song airs that little feet trip to merrily, the more so for the pleasant titillation of the words, dukes, nuts, oranges. Who could not go to the tune of such ideas? The promoters of the kindergarten system have done much to introduce games of this, or rather of a more educational kind. But is it not a fact that the singing games of the kindergarten are apt to be somewhat inane? Also, it is doubtful how far the prettiest plays, learnt at school and from a teacher, will take hold of the children, as do the games which have been passed on from hand to hand through an endless chain of children, and are not to be found in the print books at all. Skipping rope and shuttlecock. Cricket, tennis, and rounders are the games par excellence if the children are old enough to play them, both as giving free harmonious play to the muscles and also as serving the highest moral purpose of games in bringing the children under the discipline of rules. But the little family we have in view, all of them under 9, will hardly be up to scientific games. Races and chases, tig, follow my leader, and any romping game they may invent will be more to their minds. Still better are the hoop, the ball, the shuttlecock, and the invaluable skipping rope. For the rope, the very best use is for each child to skip with her own, throwing it backwards rather than forwards, so that the tendency of the movement is to expand the chest. Shuttlecock is a fine game, affording scope for ambition and emulation. Her biographer thinks it worth telling that Miss Austen could keep up in a cup and ball over 100 times, to the admiration of nephews and nieces. In like manner, any feat in keeping up the shuttlecock might be noted down as a family event, so that the children may be fired with ambition to excel in a game which affords most graceful and vigorous play to almost every muscle of the upper part of the body, and has this great recommendation, that it can be as well played within doors as without. Quite the best play is to keep up the shuttlecock with the battledore in each hand, so that the muscles on either side are brought equally into play. But to ordain about children's games is an idle waste of words, for here fashion is as supreme and as arbitrary as in questions of bonnet or crinoline. Climbing. Climbing is an amusement not much in favor with mothers. Torn garments, bleeding knees, and boot toes rubbed into holes, to say nothing of more serious risks, makes a strong case against this form of delight. But truly, the exercise is so admirable, the body being thrown into endless graceful postures, which bring every muscle into play, and the training in pluck, daring, and resource so invaluable, that it is a pity trees and cliffs and walls should be forbidden even to little girls. The mother may do a good deal to avert serious mishaps by accustoming the younger children to small feats of leaping and climbing, so that they learn, at the same time, courage and caution from their own experiences, and are less likely to follow the lead of too daring playmates. Later, the mother had best make up her mind to share the feelings of the hen that hatched a brood of ducklings, remembering that a little scream, a sharp and sudden, "Come down instantly! Tommy, you'll break your neck!" gives the child a nervous shock, and is likely to cause the fall it was meant to hinder by startling Tommy out of all presence of mind. Even boating and swimming are not without the reach of town-bred children. In days when everybody goes for a summer outing to the neighborhood of the sea or of inland waters, and then there are swimming baths in most towns. It would be well if most children of 7 were taught to swim, not only for the possible usefulness of the art, but as giving them an added means of motion, and therefore of delight. Clothing. The havoc of clothes need not be great if the children are dressed for their little excursions, as they should be, in plainly made garments of some loosely woven woolen material, serge or flannel. Woolen has many advantages over cotton, and more over linen as a clothing material, chiefly that it is a bad conductor. That is to say, it does not allow the heat of the body too free an exit, nor the heat of the sun too free an entrance. Therefore, the child in woolen, who has become heated in play, does not suffer a chill from the sudden loss of this heat, as does the child in linen garments. Also, he is cooler in the sunshine, and warmer in the shade. End of Part 2, Chapter 11. Read by John Dimitri.
Home Education Series Volume 1, Home Education, by Charlotte Mason. Part 2, Chapter 12, Walks in Bad Weather. Read by Layla Montepe. Winter walks as necessary as summer walks. All we have said hitherto applies to the summer weather, which is, alas for us, a very limited and uncertain quantity in our part of the world. The question of out-of-door exercise in winter and in wet weather is really more important. For who that could would not be abroad in the summer-time? If the children are to have what is quite the best thing for them, they should be 2 or 3 hours every day in the open air all through the winter, say an hour and a half in the morning and as long in the afternoon. Pleasures connected with frost and snow. When frost and snow are on the ground,
Children have very festive times, what with sliding, snowballing, and snow building. But even on the frequent days when it is dirty underfoot and dull overhead, they should be kept interested and alert, so that the heart may do its work cheerfully and a grateful glow be kept up throughout the body in spite of clouds and cold weather. Winter observations. All that has been said about sightseeing and picture painting, the little French talk, and observations to be noted in the family diary belongs just as much to winter weather as to summer. And there is no end to the things to be seen and noted. The party come across a big tree, which they judge from its build to be an oak. Down it goes in the diary. And when the leaves are out, the children come again to see if they are right. Many birds come into view the more freely in the cold weather that they are driven forth in search of food. The cattle mourn in corners where the fence screens them. The sun with ruddy orb ascending fires the horizon. Every herb and every spiry blade stretches a length of shadow o'er the field. The sparrows peep and quit the sheltering eaves. The redbreast warbles still, but is content with slender notes and more than half suppressed. Pleased with his solitude and flitting light from spray to spray, where'er he rests his shakes from many a twig the pendant drops of ice that tinkle in the withered leaves below. There is no reason why the child's winter walk should not be as fertile in observations as the poet's. Indeed, in one way, it is possible to see the more in winter, because the things to be seen do not crowd each other out. Habit of attention. Winter walks too, whether in town or country, give great opportunities for cultivating the habit of attention. The famous conjurer, Robert Houdin, relates in his autobiography that he and his son would pass rapidly before a shop window, that of a toy shop, for instance, and each cast an attentive glance upon it. A few steps further on, each drew paper and pencil from his pocket and tried which could enumerate the greater number of objects momentarily seen in passing. The boy surpassed his father in quickness of apprehension, being often able to write down 40 objects, while his father could scarcely reach 30. Yet, on their returning to verify his statement, the son was rarely found to have made a mistake. Here is a hint for a highly educational amusement for many a winter's walk. Wet weather tramps. But what about the wet days? The fact is that rain, unless of the heaviest, does the children no harm at all if they are suitably clothed. But every sort of waterproof garment should be tabooed, because the texture which will not admit rain will not allow of the escape of the insensible perspiration, and one secret of health for people who have no organic disease is the prompt carrying off of the decayed and harmful matters discharged by the skin. Outer garments for. Children should have woolen rain garments, made of coarse serge, for instance, to be changed the moment they return from a walk, and then there is no risk of catching cold. This is the common sense of the matter. Wet clothes are put upon the head of a fever patient. By and by the cloths dry and are dipped again. What has become of the water? It has evaporated, and in evaporating has carried off much heat from the fevered head. Now, that which eases the hot skin of fever is just the one thing to be avoided in ordinary circumstances. To be wet to the skin may do a child no more harm than a bath would do him if the wet clothes do not dry upon him. That is, if the water does not evaporate, carrying off much heat from his body in the process. It is the loss of animal heat which is followed by colds, and not the wetting, which mothers are ready to deplore. Keep a child active and happy in the rain, and he gets nothing but good from his walk. The case is altered if the child has a cold already. Then active exercise might increase any inflammation already set up. I do not know whether it is more than a pretty fancy of Richter's that a spring shower is a sort of electric bath and a very potent means of health. Certainly rain clears the atmosphere, a fact of considerable importance in and about large towns, but it is enough for our purpose to prove that the rain need do no harm, for abundant daily exercise in the fresh air is of such vital importance to the children that really nothing but sickness should keep them within doors. A mere time and distance tramp is sufficiently joyous for a wet day, for, taken good-humouredly, the beating rain itself is exhilarating. The long run of the schoolboy, that is, a steady trot, breaking now and then into a run, is capital exercise. But regard must be had to the powers of the children, who must not be overdone. Precautions. At the same time, children should never be allowed to sit or stand about in damp clothes. And here is the use of waterproof rain wraps, to keep them dry on short journeys to church or school or neighbour's house where they cannot very well change their garments. End of Part 2, Chapter 12. Read by Layla Montepe.
Home Education Series, Volume 1, by Charlotte Mason. Part 2, Chapter 13. Red Indian Life. Read by Deborah Wade. Scouting. Baden-Powell's little book about scouting set us upon a new track. Hundreds of families make joyous expeditions, far more educative than they dream, wherein scouting is the order of the day. For example, one party of 4 or more lies in ambush, the best ambush to be had, which is pitched upon after much consideration. The enemy scouts. First he finds the ambush, and then his skill is shown in getting within touch of the alert foe without being discovered. But every family should possess scouting, in default of the chance of going on the warpath with a Red Indian. The evil of the ready-made life we lead is that we do not discern the signs of the times. An alert intelligence towards what goes on in the open-air world is a great possession, and, strongly as we sympathise with the effort made to put down birds nesting, we shall lose, if we are not careful, one of the few bits of what we may call Red Indian training still within our reach. Bird stalking. But bird stalking, to adapt a name, is a great deal more exciting and delightful than bird's nesting, and we get our joy at no cost of pain to other living things. All the skill of a good scout comes into play. Think how exciting to creep noiselessly as shadows behind riverside bushes on your hands and knees without disturbing a twig or a pebble, till you get within a yard of a pair of sandpipers, and then lying low to watch their dainty little runs, pretty tricks of head and tail, and to hear the music of their call. And here comes in the real joy of bird stalking. If in the winter months the children have become fairly familiar with the notes of our resident birds, they will be able in the early summer to stalk to some purpose. The notes and songs in June are bewildering, but the plan is to single out those you are quite sure of, and then follow up the others. The key to a knowledge of birds is knowledge of their notes, and the only way to get this is to follow any note of which you are not sure. The joy of tracking a song or note to its source is the joy of a find, a possession for life. But bird stalking is not only to be done upon certain conditions. You must not only be most mousy quiet, but you must not even let a thought whisper, for if you let yourself think about anything else, the entirely delightful play of bird life passes you by unobserved. Nay, the very bird notes are unheard. Here are 2 bird walks communicated by a bird lover. We heard a note something like a chaffinch's, only slower, and we looked up in the boughs of the ash to try to track the bird, and by the sudden quiver of one twig here, another there, we found a steep rocky path which brought us almost level with the treetops, and then we had a good view of the shy little willow wren busily seeking food. A note from the next tree, like a bubbling of song, drew us further on, and then we found the wood wren and watched him, as with upturned head and bubbling throat he uttered his trill. A joyous burst of song came from a bush nearby, and we crept on to find a blackcap warbler with upraised crest turning excitedly round and round in the ecstasy of song. We waited and traced him to his next station by his light touch on the branches. A hoarse screech from another tree announced a greenfinch, and we had a long chase to get a glimpse of him, but he came to an outstanding twig, and then we heard his pretty song, which I should never have guessed to be his, had we not seen him at it. A little squeaky note made us watch the tree trunks, and sure enough there was a tree creeper running up and round an ash, uttering his note all the time. Another day we got behind a wall from which we could examine a field that lay beside the lake. There was the green plover with his jaunty crest, running and pecking, and as he pecked we caught sight of the rosy flash under his tail. You let us alone. Their distress roused other birds, and we saw a snipe rise from the water edge, a marshy place, with hasty zigzag flight. It made a long round and settled not much further than where it rose. The sandpipers rose, too, flying close to the water's edge, whistling all the time. By the side of a little gully we watched a wagtail, and presently a turn in the sunshine showed us the yellow breast of the yellow wagtail. A loud "Tssick" near us drew our eyes to the wall, and there stood a pied wagtail with full beak, waiting to get rid of us before visiting his nest in the wall. We crept away and sheltered behind a tree, and after a few minutes' waiting we saw him go into his hole. An angry chatter nearby, like a broom on Venetian blinds, directed our eyes to a little brown wren on the wall with cocked-up tail. But in a minute he disappeared like a mouse over the side. This is from another bird lover. Now they, the children, are beginning to care more for the birds than the eggs, and their first question, instead of being, "What is the egg like?" is usually, "What is the bird like?" We have great searching through Morris's British Birds to identify birds we have seen and make quite sure of doubtful points. But now for the birds. Stone chats abound on the heaths. I pricked myself up to my knees standing in a gorse patch, watching and listening to the first I saw, but I was quite rewarded and saw at least 4 pairs at a time. Do you know the birds? The cockbirds are such handsome little fellows, black head and mask, white collar, rufous breast, and dark grey or brown back. They have a pretty little song, rather longer than a chaffinch's, besides the chit-chat cry when they are disturbed. They do not make a long flight and will hover in the air like a flycatcher. The sand martins have numbers of holes in the cliffs. We tried to see how deep they burrowed to build their nests, but though I put my arm up to the elbows in several deserted holes, I could not reach the end. I think my favourites are the reed warblers. I know of at least 4 pairs, and when I could induce the children to both stop talking for a few minutes, we were able to watch them boldly hopping up and down the reeds and singing in full view of us. This is the sort of thing bird stalkers come upon, and what a loss to have those children who are not brought up to the gentle art wherein the eye is satisfied with seeing, and there is no greed of collecting, no play of the hunter's instinct to kill, and yet a lifelong joy of possession. End of Part 2, Chapter 13.
Recording by Thomas Bosk. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education, by Charlotte Mason. Part 2, Chapter 14. The Children Require Country Air. The children require country air. the essential proportion of oxygen. Everyone knows that the breathing of air which has lost little of its due proportion of oxygen is the essential condition of vigorous life and of fine physique. Also, that whatever produces heat, whether it be animal heat, or the heat of fire, candle, gas lamp, produces that heat at the expense of oxygen contained in the atmosphere, a bank which is drawn upon by every breathing and burning object. That in situations where much breathing and burning are going on, there is a terrible drain upon this vital gas. That the drain may be so excessive that there is no longer sufficient oxygen in the air to support animal life, and death results. That where the drain is less excessive, but still great, animal life may be supported, and people live a flaccid, feeble life in a state of low vitality. Excess of carbonic acid gas. Also we know that every breathing and every burning object expels a hurtful gas, carbonic acid. A very small proportion of this gas is present in the purest atmospheric air, and in that small proportion is healthful. But increase that quantity by the action of furnaces, fires, living beings, gas lamps, and the air is rendered unwholesome, just in proportion to the quantity of superfluous carbonic acid gas it contains. If the quantity be excessive, as when many people are huddled together in a small unventilated room, speedy death by suffocation is the result. Unvitiated, unimpoverished air. For these reasons, it is not possible to enjoy fullness of life in a town. For grown-up people, the stimulus of town life does something to make up for the impurity of town air, as on the other hand, country people too often forfeit their advantages through the habit of mental sluggishness they let themselves fall into. But for the children, who not only breathe but grow, who require proportionably more oxygen than adults need for their vital processes, it is absolutely cruel not to give them very frequent, if not daily, copious draughts of unvitiated, unimpoverished air, the sort of air that can be had only remote from towns. Solar light. But this is only one of the reasons why, for health's sake alone, it is of the first importance to give children long days in the open country. They want light, solar light, as well as air. Country people are ruddier than townfolk. Miners are sallow. So are the dwellers in cellars and in sunless valleys. The reason is that to secure the ruddy glow of perfect health, certain changes must take place in the blood, the nature of which it would take too long to explain here, and that these changes in the blood, marked by the free production of red corpuscles, appear to take place most favorably under the influence of abundant solar light. What is more, men of science are beginning to suspect that not only the colored light rays of the solar spectrum, but the dark heat rays and the chemical rays minister to vitality in ways not yet fully understood. A physical ideal for a child. There was a charming picture in Punch some time ago of two little boys airing their English French on their mother's new maid. Two noble little fellows, each straight as a dart, with no superfluous flesh, eyes well opened, head erect, chest expanded, the whole body full of spring even in repose. It was worth looking at, if only as suggesting the sort of physique we delight to see in a child. No doubt, the child inherits the most that he is, in this respect as in all others. But this is what bringing up may, with some limitations, effect. The child is born with certain natural tendencies, and according to his bringing up, each such tendency may run into a blemish of person or character, or into a cognate grace. Therefore, it is worth while to have even a physical ideal for one's child, not, for instance, to be run away with by the notion that a fat child is necessarily a fine child. The fat child can easily be produced, but the bright eye, the open regard, the springing step, the tones clear as a bell, the agile, graceful movements that characterize the well-brought-up child, are the result, not of bodily well-being only, but of mind and soul according well, of a quick, trained intelligence, and of a moral nature habituated to the joy of self-control. End of Part 2, Chapter 14.